Hello, everybody. We are continuing now with the section on the rules for magic on the astral plane from a treatise on white magic. We're on the 15th program of these rules for the astral plane, and actually, no, we're on the 31st program, and we're on the 15th program for Rule 10. DK is beginning to offer us some advice, and we will see how that goes. Okay. We started this earlier, I think, but it needs attention. The effort on the part of all aspirants should not be to resist and repel the pressure or to fight and ward off. Well, the pressure, of course, is coming from higher and better sources, but they are experienced dissonantly by the present organization of the personality. It's the same thing when a more advanced disciple steps into the life of an average person or an aspirant, or when a master steps into the life of a disciple or lower initiate. There always will be a disturbance. Such a method centers the attention upon the not-self and leads to added chaos. The effort should be along the lines of an endeavor to make contact with the higher self and keep it stable and steady, and to be in such direct alignment that the force and power of the soul may be poured upon and through the three lower vehicles. Okay, let's see if I can. Right, through the threefold lower nature. I'll just move this slightly, give myself a little more room here. This pouring in will bring about a steady radiation, which will affect the surroundings exactly in proportion to the extent of the inner contact and in direct relation to the clarity of the channel linking the physical brain and the causal body. Well, this is what we're after. We're after steady soul radiation, something difficult to achieve, something that we understand theoretically, but to make it real is another matter. So this alignment, direct relation of the causal body with the physical brain is what is required. The aspirant should also strive after that self-forgetfulness which merges itself in the good of those contacted. How many think this way, when contacting others? What is, one who is for others? What is the good for you? I was in a convent in a far northern city called Tromsø, Norway, and what was it? Totus tuus, something like that. Entirely for you, all for you. This was the motto of the nuns who were there in that place, and I went for the music. Usually, the vespers, the evening prayers, which were recited, actually presented rather in a kind of Gregorian chant, very beautiful. But anyway, entirely for you, and the whole idea that the Christ is the man for others, the one for others. This self-forgetfulness refers to the lower self. Self-recollectedness and self-forgetfulness should be companions. This is so important because along with self-forgetfulness, there is a definite self-remembrance, which relates to the higher self, a self-recollectedness. And even the beginning of white magic, we get the idea of gathering the forces. So we have to always realize what identity we have, even as we are overlooking and not paying a whole lot of attention to the demands of the personality. We can use the personality skillfully as an instrument, but personality demands for their own sake, these we tend to ignore if we can. The man who aims at providing a point of contact between conditions of chaos and those who work for constructive ends and order should likewise use the most necessary factor of common sense in all he does. DK tells us that the sixth ray is rather devoid of common sense, and hence the disorganized state of the world. All this will straighten out under the seventh ray, I gather. But the sixth ray monads, he tells us, don't get along so well with the seventh ray monads. That's considered from a very high point of view. Anyway, midway we stand between the chaos and the masters. Behind the warriors, twixt the light and dark, blazes the light of hierarchy. Well, the dark is the chaos. And to a great extent, the Black Lodge works through the induction of chaos, which always confuses people and makes their activity ineffective. So this is all part of DK's advice. You know, what does it say here? He's kind of offering us suggestions. I'm making certain suggestions, he says, to be followed by you or not, as deemed wise. Every aspirant should be a focal point of energy and should be in his place a conscious focal point in the midst of the whirl and storm. He should make his presence felt. The law of action and reaction works here, and often the great ones, foreseeing the need of just such points of inner contact in periods of world unrest, such as this one is, gather into certain localities those who are aspirants to service. And, there was that, well, at least in the New York area, it's a major center, and Alice Bailey was holding those ashram meetings every month at the time of the full moon, more or less, as I understand it. Anyway, people are positioned with an important plan-related end in view. They act as a balance and aid the general plan, and at the same time, they themselves learn the much-needed lessons. Okay. So, common sense. That is the sixth sense. It synthesizes all the other sense, but it generally implies in our language a level head, a realistic approach to life on the physical plane and on other planes, and wild exaggerations and minimizations do not occur. This involves always obedience to the law of economy of force due to discrimination and a true sense of values. So the idea is not to waste, and this is and discrimination, and we must have discrimination. Discrimination. How about spelling that? According to the higher values, which in this case, of course, soul values. Do we live according to soul values? Sometimes one has to be a little bit tough, a little harsh on circumstances that do not give way easily to sweet reason. Jesus, I guess it was Jesus, he threw the money changers out of the temple. And there are many ways in which a high soul sometimes has to act with force, with strength, and with the first ray, and that which does not look so pleasant. Sometimes we confuse spirituality with pleasantness, and it isn't so, because pleasantness so often simply preserves an inadequate condition instead of disrupting it according to the demands of a higher archetype. Where these are present, time will be economized, strength will be husbanded, energy will be wisely distributed, excessive zeal will be eliminated, and that's, the tempering of the sixth ray. And the great ones will be able to depend upon an aspirant's sagacity and thus find a helper. Sagacity, sage, wisdom. That's the idea behind it. So, okay, how? Oops, as usual, if I'm too quick. How does Master Decay describe common sense? And here we have it. Here we have it. And probably good to take this in, take it in. This involves always obedience to the law of economy. It's the third ray law, but it's the builder of the foundation. Everything is based upon it. If we, the old saying, waste not, want not, if you waste, it just won't be there. What you need will not be there when the presence of that which you need counts the most. So obedience to the law of economy of force due to discrimination between what is of the soul and what is of the personality, and a true sense of value, spiritual values based upon, well, what the soul seeks to accomplish, what the plan seeks to accomplish. Where these are present, time will be economized, no great dilation of time. Time is very important. Time is so important, Master Moria said that if someone wastes your time, it's murder. If you waste your own time, it's suicide. Those are pretty strong words. Where these are present, time will be economized, strength will be husbanded, will be guarded, energy will be wisely distributed, not scattered all over the place. It's a danger under the Aquarian energy, this scattering of energy, and excessive zeal, or the ray of undue emphasis will be eliminated, or at least the excesses of the ray of undue emphasis, the sixth ray, will be eliminated, and the great ones will find someone there that can really be counted upon and can be deemed a helper. All occult training has in view the development of the aspirant so that he may indeed be a focal point of spiritual energy instead of an obstructive unit of personal force. It should be remembered, however, that under the law, this training will be cyclic and will have its ebb and flow as all else in nature, so that there may be assimilation and right application. Times of activity succeed times of pralaya, relative pralaya, and periods of registered contact alternate with periods of apparent silence because there still is supervision. This avoids, what we call burnout. I'm sure we've all had that experience of overstimulation, and eventually it creates a certain condition of disorganization in the vehicle. And then you have to regather the organization, you have to rest so that the elements of the vehicle are ready to respond instead of being greatly fatigued by excessive contact. So anyway, note here the choice of words, apparent silence. It's not really silence. The higher forces are aware. This alternation is due to the imposition of the law of periodicity, and if the student develops as desired, each pralaic period is succeeded by one of greater activity and more potent achievement. Well, that's the second fundamental of the, what do you call them? These are the principles of the secret doctrine, the foundations. Those are not quite the right words, but principles of the secret doctrine. The right word escapes me, but these are the fundamentals. The second law is the law of periodicity. So the imposition of the law of periodicity, and if the student develops as desired, each prolaic period is succeeded by one of greater activity and of more potent achievement. The factor of rest, the need for regrouping, the need for rejuvenation, regeneration is always needed after you subject any system to a lot of rigor and demand. So we have to remember that there are moments to rest, and how often it has been that Master DK advised his students, well, don't work all the time, take the necessary periods of leisure, because in the long run it's going to do better for you. Rhythm, ebb and flow, and the measured beat of the pulsating life are ever the law of the universe, and even at the very height of the universe, the great breath at the height of the universe, whatever height means. And in learning to respond to time, vibration of the high places, and in learning to respond to time, vibration of the high places, this rhythmic periodicity must be borne in mind. Rhythmic periodicity. Well, we awaken, we sleep, and hopefully there's some rhythm in it all, some regularity in it all, so that we do not live a disrupted and chaotic life. Sometimes when subjected to these higher forces, the lower forces do become disturbed and overstimulated, and then a nice pulsating beat, the measured beat of a pulsating life, but we find that that desirable condition is not existing, but rather there is disturbance. Did Alice Bailey sleep 2 or 3 hours a night? So the story goes. Anyway, she was subjected to tremendous pressure. What a weight of responsibility. Obviously, when Master DK was ready, she had better be ready, and it wasn't always the case, unfortunately, but, there was no way with a human being that it actually could be the case. So he had to be very aware that she was an instrument, and had to be very savvy about when and to what extent that instrument could be used, when enough was enough, how far you could drive the instrument before there were negative repercussions. Okay. And then learning to respond to time, vibration of the high places. It's almost like there's something missing here. Let's just see if I can find that. And come on now. Oh, okay. Somehow something happened there. Let's see if I can get this back. And in learning to respond to time, and in learning to respond, well, there's something wrong. Page 324. Let's see if I can, that's wrong. Wrong words there, okay. So this is a treatise on white magic, and we have page. Sorry for the delay here. 324. It's 1, and let's see if the need for rest, basically, he's talking about. Okay. It's about fatigue and whether or not we will experience that fatigue. This is 324, so it's really 323 that we're looking for. Okay. Rhythm, flow, etc. The same governs a human being. Right. Okay. Well, I think. Okay. Well, I checked up on it. It looks like this may be one of those difficult transfers from the book itself where some word is left out. But I think we get the idea. The rhythmic periodicity must be borne in mind when we consider how we shall spend time in our life. Or time vibration of the high places. Maybe that's the word. Anyway, I can't at the moment go get the original, but you can search it out right before 324. The same law governs a human being, a planet, a solar system. All centers are focal points of energy in some greater life. If such work as you are doing is to succeed, and it is largely the work of developing the ability to touch certain currents on mental levels, currents which emanate from the higher self, from your egoic group, or from your master, definite plan conditions must be provided. So he's giving us advice regarding our success and how we can use time and periods wisely under the law of periodicity. Certain factors must be present. If they do not exist. Interesting, isn't it, that we have to touch certain currents on the mental level from the higher self egoic group or the master. Okay, now also since the ashrams had moved by this time, but there are lower triadal currents as well, intuitional currents, Buddhic currents, and so forth, but we are talking about the higher mental plane to a great extent here. Definite plan conditions must be provided. Certain factors must be present. If they do not exist, then the currents are, if I may so express it, deflected and contact fails of accomplishment. Okay. If occupation with mundane affairs is necessitated, and such periods come in every life cycle, then the attention should be concentrated on these details, and the higher contacts may be then temporarily unrealized. I understand that Master DK could not work with AAB when she was under the influence of too much concrete malice. Had to wait for another time, as she would not be able to receive properly. And basically, when we're dealing with concrete matters, we really pay attention to them and don't distract ourselves with hope for higher contacts when our attention has to be given to the matters immediately at hand. Such attention to affairs on the physical plane is not necessarily loss of time, for it may be as much a part of the plan at that particular time, as other kinds of service. So, in a way, okay, no high or low, but only life in all its vibrations to be handled correctly. Sometimes it's difficult. I remember the story, well, say you're building a cathedral and people have some humble task. Maybe they're just moving rocks, from one place to another, or bricks or stones or something of that nature. And one person could be exhausted and ask, what are you doing? Well, I'm just carrying stones from place to place. And another person doing the same thing would be asked, well, what are you doing? I'm Well, I'm building a cathedral to the glory of God. So it all depends on the context in which you understand your task. As a person myself, give an example, I don't have a whole lot of earth signs in my horoscope, maybe just one, Venus and Taurus, and, it's led to, musical life and that kind of thing. And maybe not too fit to do things on the physical plane, but I try to tell myself, when I'm engaged in mundane activities, what's it all for, really? The task itself seems boring, but that just shows that there's something to be learned. And I try to think of the larger context, because then it gives greater upliftment and joy in dealing with the mundane things. If you're washing the dishes, you're preserving the cleanliness which is next to godliness. I mean, there's all these different ways of interpreting what we're doing. And so many of us may not want to do the karmic task immediately at hand because it seems so mundane, but okay, it doesn't seem to lead anywhere, but it's all in the attitude. That's what leads somewhere. Full expression and consciousness on each and every plane is the objective, remembering that each plane with its varying states of consciousness is equally a part of the divine life. Yes, exactly. Easily said. And then to be lived is another matter, but at least we understand what the idea is. Whether we're working in the area of low vibration or high vibration, we're working. And it's all equally divine, and it's all one substance in various degrees of externalization and projection from true being. It's all one thing. So, we need to remind ourselves of these things, lest we become selfish and only do preferred things even which our personality prefers. What is lacking as yet with the majority of aspirants is the synthetic consciousness and the capacity to hold and register continuity. What kind of continuity? The realization of continuity of being in, oops, I don't want that, do I? Being in all circumstances. All right. Well, we have to continuously train ourselves, and submit to the training of the solar angel. We have to reinterpret all we do in terms of the plan and the larger context, and see how whatever we may karmically be compelled to do may be actually part of the plan itself. Now, right now, let me tell you, I'm supposed to be walking the cats. I've chosen instead to make this program and told myself, well, I'll walk the cats right after I finish this program. Maybe a wiser thing would have been to walk the cats immediately, because the rain may come now. I may not be able to walk them. If I don't, they're not as healthy. If I let them go without walking, they will escape, and there will be general grief and sadness, and they may never come back. All kinds of consequences arise from our decisions. If emotional and if emotional or mental chaos exists, then again the currents are deflected, and the brain makes no record of that which may be inwardly seen and heard. So conditions, let's just say conditions which are mental and emotional can prevent brain registration of that which must eventually be registered. I mean, this is all, isn't it just common sense? Maybe a treatise on cosmic fire is common sense to the higher initiate, but this is common sense to us. trying to make us really fit instruments for the reception of many energies which are passing through, attempting to pass through, could profitably pass through and be utilized, but which are not because of our condition. The difference between condition and an archetype. Condition is Saturnian, it's how things are in actuality, and the archetype is how things should be. So there are always these energies trying to rearrange conditions into a more ideal relationship, more Uranian. That's really the relationship between Uranus and Saturn. Although Saturn is much more, but Uranus can and does arrange things in ultimate archetypal relationship. And, that whether that's on the monadic plane or even from the point of view of a higher archetype within the sea of fire. There's great geometry, DK tells us, in the sea of fire. And he describes Shambhala. The highest part of Shambhala is in the sea of fire, and it's not just chaos. It's something very beautiful, which sets the archetype for all other archetypes and for, finally, for the straightening out of conditions. If fatigue is present and the physical body is in need of rest, then likewise the inner fails to be recorded. It is the centers in the etheric vehicle which are vitalized and become active in this work of contact and consequent transmission of energy. So we're talking about the activation of the centers for the sake of a very living response to the divine plan. And we all know those moments of fatigue when you just can't do a thing, You know maybe what you should do, and you want to do it, but the physical body is just not responding. Well, we have to treat our mechanism with common sense. And maybe people who have a lot of earth signs are better at that, more realistic about that. Sometimes you have to drive the vehicle beyond its normal possibilities in emergencies, but other times, in interest of success over the long haul, you treat it with respect to the law of periodicity and just in general with respect. So become active in this work and consequent transmission of energy. If therefore the vitality is low and the pranic fluids are not assimilated, because they can be, they can be present without being assimilated, this says, then the whole vibratory contact is lowered and the center fails to register vibration and response. DK sometimes talks about, well, mayhap our vibration is a bit lower at times than it should be. He talks about that. When again the stimulation is adequate and the other conditions are resolved into the necessary quietude, so adequate stimulation, necessary quietude, then again the currents may be encountered. Response follows in a fresh cycle of receptivity eventuates. So we need adequate stimulation and non-interference by noisy energies, the opposite of quietude, which deflect. I've entered thus into explanation as I've seen many questioning, and am anxious that the process followed may be somewhat clarified. Even anxious, says the master. He says, I beg of you, do this. He's anxious. I fear that you may, he says. Of course, these are turns of speech, and we don't know really what his inner state of consciousness is, but he does use those human words. And he says, except for my higher powers, I'm just like you. I'm anxious that the process followed may be somewhat clarified. It is wise that all who work should have a clear understanding of that work and should, along lines so closely affecting their power, be fully aware of each step taken. So, clear, clear consciousness, is needed. Consciousness is needed. And deliberation, step by step. Well, he wants to make a master of us. We become masters by mastering our circumstances, and there are clear methods of doing so. If we would just be really present in our mind and act consciously and not be subject to maybe the lower meaning of Maya, which is sort of thoughtless action involving kind of emotions which are out of control. If we would just not go for the exaggerations, but see things truly and proportionally, we would overcome glamour. If we would just not see things in such a fragmentary manner, but see them as related and ultimately as one thing, we would overcome illusion, dispelling it. So he's giving us some advice here, and of course, it's up to us. What does he say? You'll make use of it or you won't. Isn't that what he says up here? Somewhere up here. Therein lies for all aspirants at this time the peculiar effort of the coming days, and I would for your guidance make certain suggestions to be followed by you or not, as deemed wise. This is not so much the first ray attitude of forcing compliance, I suppose. I remember some work there, maybe a book which had Master Moria's influence in it, and it was called Leaves of Moria's Garden. I'm not sure, was it written by Nicholas Roerich? Was it written by Helena Roerich? I don't know. I didn't ask Daniel Enton when he was alive. That was, but somebody knows. And basically in that book, it basically said Moria was saying, or someone who was writing as if they were Moria was saying, when I say jump, jump, when I say move, move, when I say get out of the way, get out of the way, just obey my command. Well, maybe the second ray attitude is a little different. As we can see, we make use of it or not accordingly, according to our wisdom and judgment. As regards the problems occupying the attention of all of you who are living in this time of world unrest and upheaval, I have a word of cheer to give you. Well, this is before the Second World War broke out, and it was in that period between the First and Second World War, and in that period, in the Agni Yoga books, there was a great deal of writing about the attacks of the Black Lodge and the epidemic of obsession and the drawing closer of the dark extinguishers and all that. It all did happen, and those inner occult powers, I'm sure, were effective in conditioning human feeling and chemomonastic response in such a way that the war did precipitate. But he still has here a word of cheer. Though to you the whole situation may have seemed clouded and the horizon darkened by storms, bear in mind that when the disturbance is general as now, and the whole area involved, then the end is near. Well, that war lasted 6, 5, 4 years, depending upon what country you were in and when it entered the war, but generally humanity was in this condition of disturbance, all of humanity. In general, in nature, a general electric storm serves to clear the atmosphere and ushers in a period of sunshine and more grateful living conditions. And I suppose we did have these following the year 1945. The Great Invocation was given out, and more grateful living conditions supervened. Now, whether we've made the best use out of that, or whether, like the man who had all those devils in his house, he swept them out and then didn't pay proper attention, before you know it, he was infested with even more devils. So where are we now? Where are we now? Certainly there is the rising of the last-ditch fight of materialism. He said they would fight to the last ditch to maintain their prerogatives. So it's happening, and we have challenges to the soul going on right now all over the world, but I would say very definitely in the United States, which makes me think that that country will be quite important with its second-ray soul and its Aquarian soul in the reappearance of the Christ. I like the way, and maybe the Christ, he's going to choose his headquarters. What will it be? Will it be near the United Nations? Will it be the United Nations? These are speculations, but until certain work is done by the externalizing masters and their disciples in certain designated locales, the Christ cannot possibly appear, so it's not going to be instantaneously at 2025 that he appears. It just can't be, because there's too many hierarchical projects or influences that have to make their impact before he can appear on that great wave of expectancy, as it is said. We have had the electrical storm of the World War. Well, when he says that, remember, this is the first world World War, the Great War. And, great was the hope that it did not have to precipitate, but could be fought out on the psychological level, because it was kind of went underground, And the period of gradual dispersion of the clouds has been with us, with the thunder, we have picturesque language here, rumbling around, and sudden sharp storms of wind and rain unsettling the hopefulness of those desiring sunshine. This picturesque language gives probably some view of the inner psychic condition of things. Those who with patience carry on the work, who keep the inner calm and surety, who lose sight of the foreground of personalities and bear only in mind the formless forces that are at work through all forms and seasons, will see order brought out of chaos, construction out of past destruction, and present adjustments. They will be seeing the setting loose of fresh forces, hitherto shut out by the crystallizing shells built by man. Well, he says, look, if things remained as they were before World War I, so crystallized it was that humanity could not progress. So there have been destruction of those shells, and even more destruction followed, and the whole 20th century, filled with such a promise of progress, ended up being a great century of wars, and it does continue. We have to remember that humanity is a fourth-ray kingdom, and the fourth ray is the ray of war first, and then of the harmony which resolves the conflict of war. But he's advising us, in these, I like this phrase, the foreground of personalities. I think it really says something here. When we deal with personalities, it's really the superficial part. And behind it, through spiritual discernment, we can maybe, if we are very discerning, detect the soul and detect the proper spiritual movements. So they lose sight of the foreground of personalities, and how successfully do we do this? And bear only in mind the formless forces that are at work through all forms and seasons. Such people will see order brought out of chaos, construction out of the past destruction, and present adjustments. They will see the setting loose of fresh life forces hitherto, and that certainly did happen in the latter part of the 20th century, certainly in the realm of consciousness. The world was swept by a new form of consciousness based upon some very old and real uh, forms of consciousness, at least forms that revealed reality. I do remember that he said regarding the 19th century that certain artists, musicians, whatever, were let loose into incarnation before their time really had come. Maybe their time was more like the coming Renaissance following 2025. But they were led into society in the hope that it could uplift and redeem the tendencies which were towards, if I may say so, blood and iron. You know, the whole Bismarckian German authoritarianism that eventually led to the world wars. But it didn't succeed quite. I mean, there was a lot of beauty released, great beauty was released, but it didn't succeed. And you kind of wonder now, in the 20th century, you know, the consciousness movement of the 20th century, maybe still somewhat continuing. Did it succeed? You know, did this flooding of human consciousness with the wisdom of the East, basically, did it leaven the mass consciousness? Did it elevate those with higher consciousness into still higher positions? Did it succeed? Well, we're going to find out, aren't we? So, hold the inner vision steady and have that long patience which endures through the lesser cycle, because the key to the greater cycle has been held with firmness. Advice, right? Hold the inner vision steady. And have that long patience. It says that the masters, they stride centuries. Their stride is over centuries. We just walk through every day. But that is their perspective, the development of centuries. So hold the inner vision steady and have that long patience which endures through the lesser cycle, because the key to the greater cycle has been held with firmness. So with spiritual discernment, look beyond the foreground of personalities. There they are, acting their moment upon the stage, you know, strutting and fretting, as Shakespeare said, but they're not the real thing. They are the evanescent, impermanent factors which will disappear, must disappear, or be used simply as instruments. Anyway, you can't count on them. Our personality, anybody's personality, you can't really count on it unless it's so thoroughly integrated with the soul that it is, in fact, the instrument of the soul. Now, we seem to be dealing with maybe a new subject here. I'm going to try to make a longer program if I can. You know, the hour, I usually try to do an hour, and sometimes if very pressed, then just a half hour, but maybe it's possible to continue. We have another 10 minutes until it's 1 hour, and then maybe I'll just note that and go on if I can. It might be of value to touch briefly upon certain main lines of thought which are emerging at the present time and which are the outgrowth of the past and promise of the future. Well, you know, what is this section we're in? What is this? Okay, if I can, the present and the future. Exactly, that's what we're in. So it seems that I should make that really big. And so we can always find it, you know. That's sort of the reason for enlarging these headings, and so one doesn't get lost, All right. So where are we now? We're about on page 325, somewhere here. It might be of value to touch briefly upon certain main lines of thought, okay, which are emerging at the present time and which are the outgrowth of the past and promise of the future. The thoughts of men have ever been religious, to rebind us, to retie us, excuse me, to our forgotten source. There has never been a time when religion or the thoughts of men about God, about the infinite, and about life, which has brought all into being, has not been present. All right, so never a time of utter materialism, simply thinking about that which the senses, lower senses, present. Even the most ignorant of savage races have recognized a power and have attempted to define their relationship to that power in terms of fear, of sacrifice, or of propitiation. Propitiate the gods, make them satisfied, offer up a sacrifice, and sometimes ghastly sacrifices, but we've all been involved in that, and somehow we're all still here, right? So the instrument goes, but the essential human being remains. So fear, sacrifice, or propitiation. Well, we're not into that anymore, are we? We try to understand the love of God. We do make sacrifices, but not of others. And we propitiate the gods by our spiritual behavior. From the rudiments of nature worship, maybe animism of a kind, although even animism has a certain wisdom to it. All things are animated by the great deity, the great being. From the rudiments of nature worship, from the fetishism and degraded idol worship of primitive man, we have built up a structure of truth which, though as yet imperfect and inadequate, does verily lay the foundation of the temple of truth, of the future temple of truth, where the light of the Lord will be seen and will prove adequate as an expression of reality. It's very beautiful. I'm reminded of a movie. I'm always telling you about movies, right? Maybe I don't, certain parts impress me. And it was a movie with a strange title, The Gods Must Be Crazy. And somehow, out of some airplane or some vehicle, a Coke bottle landed in the middle of the jungle. And I think it was an empty Coke bottle. And somehow the people there who were, in a very benighted state began to worship this Coke bottle because it had descended from heaven. Well, okay. We are progressing and have progressed. We've all been through some ridiculous ignorance compared to our present state. But, you can't criticize anybody passing through it. We've passed through it. Everybody passes through it. From the rudiments of nature worship, from the fetishism, where you sort of take a partial aspect and make it the whole, even the partial aspect of a human being, and act as if it's the whole, and give undue emphasis to it and overvalue it greatly. And degraded idol worship, there's where the Westerners had it all so wrong, because they didn't understand about the symbolic consciousness of the East. And suppose they see one of those ghastly statues of bloodthirsty Kali, with a belt of decapitated heads around her. They think the people are actually thinking that's a god, but it's simply a symbolism, and they are the ones who thought that others thought it was a god, are the ones that are in a more benighted state. Degraded idol worship of primitive man, we have built up a structure of truth, which, though as yet imperfect and inadequate, does verily lay the foundation of the future temple of truth. These temples on the inner planes we're told about. I wonder, have we dealt with them in this book somehow? The temple of the Buddha on the mental plane and the Christ on the astral plane, and eventually eventually an outer temple arising, maybe in which initiation occurs, and then the Temple of Solomon on the higher mental plane. All of these temples are consecrated points of tension with symbolic factors reminding us of the great truths to be expressed at the particular level on which the temple exists. The Temple of Truth, future Temple of Truth, very beautiful idea, where the light of the Lord, Sanat Kumar, I suppose, no, will be seen and which will prove adequate as an expression of reality. So all the way from the darkest night of misinterpretation and ignorance, we are coming more and more into the truth of things. We've sacrificed a lot, descending as extensions of the monad, which has at least planetary knowledge to a great extent. We've attenuated that knowledge until we are encapsulated in a very circumscribed perceptual possibility. And all that so that we can thoroughly lift all aspects of ourselves, even the lower beings, which are more encapsulated than we and not self-conscious and so forth. It's all done on sacrifice. The gesture of the Spirit is sacrificial, so that all aspects of being are served. Out of the darkness of time there have emerged the great religions. These religions, though diverse in their theologies and forms of worship, though characterized by distinctions of organization and ceremonial, and though differing in their methods of application of truth, are united, in three basic aspects. The uniting of the various great religions. And this we have to understand, it's this unwise tendency to prefer one's religion over that of others, to prefer one's nation, to prefer one's lesser ego over that of others. It's just blindness and an inadequately expansive point of view, a non-inclusive point of view that we have to overcome. So they're united in three aspects in their teaching as to the nature of God and man in general, in their symbolism, and in certain fundamental doctrines. You might have to search pretty far and wide. In some religions there's quite a split between transcendental God and man, and other religions maybe are wiser about certain things. We have the transcendent God, but we also have immanent God immanent, and both are held to be true, and in certain religions the idea of God immanent is rejected utterly. So it all depends on how much the concrete mind, with its tendency towards hard and fast dichotomization, is ruling the religious consciousness. Symbolism can point to different things and the same thing, and certain fundamental doctrines. That's it. It's the four, that was the word I was looking for, doctrine, I think. The four basic, is it? Doctrines of the secret doctrine? Fundamentals, maybe fundamentals is the word I'm looking for. Well, we seem to be friends at that hour point. But if I can, now having a little bit more time just at this moment, I can perhaps, no, that's just it. Nope. Well, I'm just not doing too well, am I? I keep on forgetting how to do this, you know. Anyway, that's going to be something. No. Anyway, I want to make a line here. And it's not working too well. But this would be like, we just say end of 1 hour. So end of, 1 hour for program number 31. And I'll be back shortly, and I hope be able to continue. There it is. If I don't think it works. Okay, I'll be back shortly. And continue with this. It'll be a longer program. Okay, friends, I think we can go on now. This is still number 31. And we are on page, whatever page we are, 326. And we've just talked about the emergence of the great world religions from truly ignorant roots. And though they may diverse in their theologies and forms of worship and characterized by distinctions of organization and ceremonial, and though differing in their methods of application of truth, they are united in basic aspects. So these are the aspects. United as to the nature of God and man, united in their symbolism, and united in certain fundamental doctrines. So now we can go on into the next hour or so, or half hour, whatever it may be. When men recognize this and succeed in isolating that inner significant structure of truth, which is the same in all climes and in all races, then there will emerge the universal religion, the one church, and that unified, though not uniform approach to God, which will demonstrate the truth of St. Paul's words, O Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in you all. Okay, let's look at that. So the new and universal, at least for this planet, world religion will emerge. One Lord, it's a unity, isn't it? One Lord, one faith, really, one baptism, one God and Father of all, and Mother of all, who is above all and through all, you know, God transcendent and immanent both, and in you all. Theologies will disappear into the knowledge of God. In other words, from, let's see here, from mental estimation into true experience. Theologies will disappear into the knowledge of God. Doctrines and dogmas will no longer be regarded as necessary, or faith will be based on experience, and authority will give place to personal appreciation of reality. This is so important. And then what becomes of the priests, and what do they do, and who are they? You know, that's the question in this new approach to religion, where in a way every human being is his own connection with his own higher self or divinity. Doctrines and dogmas will no longer be regarded as necessary because, you know, they let's just say, they indicate the real thing, but our mental formulations of that real thing, which is accessible to true spiritual experience. Formulations. The power of the church over the group, and remember, the Church of Rome began as a first-ray organization with a third-ray personality, not much second-ray to be found representing the great Lord on the second ray. The power of the church over the group will be supplanted by the power of the awakened soul in men. Beautiful. And on its way, as we rise into our higher spiritual possibilities, the age of miracles and the disputations as to why and how of those miracles, with the consequent skepticism or agnosticism, will give way to the understanding of the laws of nature, which control the superhuman realm and the supernatural states of evolutionary progress. In other words, we will have real contact with these dimensions and not simply mental formulations of what these dimensions may or may not hold. So the mind will still be necessary, I suspect, but it will be simply a support to the actual and direct experience. Man will enter into his divine heritage and know himself as the Son of the Father, with all the divine characteristics, powers, and capabilities which are his because of his divine endowment. So, what's another way of saying this? We might say, man will recognize his divinity and experience it, and supplant with direct experience that which has hitherto been merely mental formulations of the experience he now truly has. But in the meantime, and that's the point in this transitional age, as we move from the age of belief into the age of knowledge, from the age of Pisces, that is, into the age of direct knowledge, scientifically supported. But in the meantime, what have we? A breaking away from old established tradition, a revolt against authority, whether of the church, of dogma, doctrine, or theology, a tendency towards self-determination, and an overthrowing of the old standards and of old barriers of thought and the divisions existing between races and faiths. So this is, in a way, a beneficently destructive period. Now, this was maybe 90 years ago this was written, something like that. But it still continues, and certainly in so many countries, people feel they just don't need the church, They don't need the authority of the church for anything. Maybe a few conservative people hold on to it. They'll think for themselves. They'll enter direct experience. I think a lot of the experimental drug culture is about trying to have direct experience of other dimensions, as destructive as that may be due to ill regulation and lack of supervision and so forth. But self-determination is that personal determination, is that soul determination. That's what it must be eventually. And rebellion, overthrow, Uranus, throwing out the old, and finding that the old Saturnian barriers based on dogmatic thought no longer should prevail. Of course, this is not yet universal. There are quite a few people still trapped in the old methods, and the Piscean age has to fade out during this 21st century and will largely, almost entirely, be faded out by the end of this century. Hence, we are passing through an intermediate stage of change and of questioning, of rebellion and consequent license. So, going too far in the rebellion. This is why the fourth ray is needed to create the bridge between what is valuable in the old formulation and what must emerge in the new. BRID. Okay. Maybe BRIDGE. Okay. The methods of science, investigation and analysis, comparison and deduction are being applied to religious belief, and maybe we owe much of this to Master Hilarion, who is in charge of the fifth ray ashram from a Chohanic position, but also deeply experienced as in relation to the Master Jesus and his sixth ray formulation. So it's a psychism and science, religion and science are fusing under the dual and interrelated work of Master Hilarion and Master Jesus. The history of religions, the foundations of doctrine, the origin of ideas, and the growth of the God idea are being subjected to research and study. So, let's just say a continuation of the age of enlightenment. And this leads to much disputation, to the rejection of old established ideas as to God, the soul, man, and his destiny. Yes, of course, with Aquarius, there's always a danger. With Aquarius, one may throw out the baby with the bathwater. So that's where the fourth ray comes into its usefulness to prevent any too sharp cleavage between the values of the past, some of which may be sound, and the necessary emerging values of the future. Okay. So, schools of thought have ever existed, offering in their ideas and methods, differing in their ideas and methods, rather, and the six schools of Indian philosophy have embodied in themselves practically all the basic speculations of man as to why and wherefore, as to the why and wherefore of manifestation. Well, let's see, sometimes it's interesting if we can quickly find six schools, philosophy, just a few. Let's see what we can find here. Just refresh our memory. If we can find it. And that's the light of the soul. I think it's in a footnote, I think so. Let's see. Let's see if I can. Six schools. And we'll forget the word philosophy for just a second and see if we can do any better. Well, maybe, we would have to find the footnote in which this is found. but maybe I think we cannot do that right now. Okay. So I know there are some footnotes in the beginning of the essay in Treatise on Cosmic Fire, I think. And, well, you know, all the way from the very materialistic schools to the very abstract schools. Let's just see. I don't think the footnotes are mentioned, so it would be quite a hunt. And let's just see. Maybe there's another way to do this. For instance, what if we try the following, and we do 6 schools of Indian philosophy. We'll do it that way. Samkhya, knowledge. Nyaya, knowledge as well. Okay, wait a second. Indian philosophy. There are 6. Okay, Wikipedia should be good. Let's see if we can do that. Well, I think this is something we may be able to study ourselves. Let's see, Indian philosophy, 6 schools, allow. Okay, well, I had it for a moment there. Here it is. The Samkhya school, the Yoga school, the Nyaya school, the Vaisheshika school of Indian philosophy, Mimamsa school, and Vedanta school. Well, non-dualism here, and yes, I think we have enough that we could easily look at these. The Yoga Sutras written by Patanjali, okay. The Nyaya school, authored by Gautama, school of logical thinking. Kapila, 2 principles, Purusha and Prakriti. Okay, it's a big study. But we can easily go to the internet or even find the footnote in Master DK's work and come up with what is of value and interest in these 6 schools of Indian philosophy. Okay, I won't get into that, right now. 6 schools of thought have ever existed. It's like the 6 around the 1, if you take 6 coins, 7 coins of equal size, 6 will hexagonally surround the 1. Schools of thought have ever existed, differing in their ideas and methods, and the 6 schools of Indian philosophy have embodied in themselves practically all the basic speculations of man as to why and wherefore of manifestation. Of course, I'm tempted to get into that right now, but it goes all the way from the most materialistic to the most non-dual and abstract in Vedanta. Little which is new has been added by the Occident to these 6 speculative schools, though the Western mind, with its genius for scientific techniques and method, has elaborated the ideas and differentiated the 6 theories into a multiplicity of lesser propositions. So the, the West has a differentiating mind. This is basically what he's telling us. Out of the medley of ideas, theories, speculations, religions, churches, cults, sects, and organizations, 2 main lines of thought are emerging. One is doomed eventually to die out, and the other to strengthen and grow until it, in its turn, gives birth to that, for us, ultimate formulation of truth, which will suffice for the next age, and which will carry man to the pinnacle, to the high pinnacle of the temple of initiation. Well, I imagine, that the two have to do with materialism and spirituality in a general sort of way. It's very interesting to think what the mind has produced and how we have sincere adherence of these different systems all the way from identifying all things as one thing to the utmost differentiation of factors. And in the middle is a kind of a dualism of Purusha and Prakriti. So you can study that further, as I will, again. And I think what's important here is that we are in the middle of a transitional phase, and we're trying to settle upon that which will lead to a universal world religion and a universal world philosophy which will not stifle and crush out the interesting idiosyncrasies of various approaches, but which will unite them in one fundamental approach, which really will include them all. So there are two lines. One will die, and the other will carry us to the Mount of Initiation. What are these two approaches? Let's take a look here. Those who look back to the past, who hang on to the old ways, the ancient theologies, and the reactionary rejection methods of finding truth. These are the people who recognize authority, whether that of a prophet, a Bible, or theology. So we will say, with the fading of the sixth ray, this approach will also fade out. All right. These are those who prefer obedience. We're seeing this even right now in those who are subject to demagoguery and those who really think for themselves. I think we saw in Nazism a terrible, tremendous example of the will to follow a Führer, a leader, and not to really think for oneself. These are those who prefer obedience to imposed authority, to the self-imposed guidance of an enlightened soul. There's a great contrast here. There's some Mussolini, there's some Hitler, there's some Japanese leader, and now others who would be king, who are subject to the old emperor-king archetype and narcissistically believe in their political, social omnipotence. It's a sad and fading and must. I think the United States is a place where the free soul on the second ray must triumph over the method of blind belief, blind and often unreasoning belief, or a kind of reasoning which is badly affected by the desire body and by bias. Okay, so these are the followers of a church, of a government, who are distinguished by a pure devotion and love, but refuse recognition to the divine intelligence with which they are gifted. Now, maybe a good thing here, the sixth ray soul can also transfer onto the intelligent third ray. And sometimes you see third ray people who are extremely idealistic, and you feel, well, yeah, they didn't come off the fourth ray particularly, they came off the sixth ray for many millions of years. You don't get transferences to rays 1, 2, and 3 from the soul perspective until evolution is quite advanced. And in the case of rays 1 and 2, you don't get transference until the period when the first initiation is possible. Followers, though, however, and rejecting their own divine intelligence, we might say, what might we say here? Refusing to really think for themselves. Gifted, okay. So let's see what this looks like. Refusing, come on now. Always I have a little problem here. Refusing to really think for themselves. Okay. Gosh, sorry. This is kind of a mess here. All right. And this will be faster. And, you know, it's very hard to convince such people that they do have reason and they can begin to trust their reason more than they do. Actually, they're motivated by fear because usually there's some promise given to the one who believes, such as, let's say, heaven or paradise. And thus, their mortality continues in an immortal condition. You know, it's the fear of extinction that's operating there. And I know a person who said, well, I just don't dare think about it because I might be led off the track of my faith. And then what would happen to me? Okay, well, then I would not spend eternity in heaven. So we have a lot of work to do. And how shall it be done? I suppose science will come to our aid and be convincing about survival and the different dimensions of nature, and then very shortly the proof of reincarnation. This is indispensable for an intelligent approach to life. Their devotion, their love of God, their strict but misguided conscience, their intolerance mark them out as devotees, but they are blinded by their own devotion, and their growth is limited by their fanaticism. You know, if we're looking for contrasts, we might say that but refuse what? What do they refuse? Recognition? Yeah. By pure devotion and love. So unfortunately, I have to go back here. Sorry for that. By a pure devotion and love, but refuse recognition to the divine intelligence with which they are gifted. Okay, and I'll just put that in there. But refuse recognition. Okay, and this is it here. But refuse recognition of the divine intelligence with which they are gifted. Okay. And here is the rest of that. Their devotion, their love of God, their strict. It's so Saturnian in a way. It's a very Old Testament approach. You know, I don't know how it is in other religions, but I know there's a whole range of response, all the way from quite inclusive and benevolent to very strict and intolerant. And the more strict and intolerant one finds the system, the more fear lies at its root. Right. They're blinded by their own devotion, and their growth is limited by their fanaticism. After all, if you're emphasizing only one thing, how can you expand and learn expand into and learn about other things. So you just overemphasize, and beat that one point of focus, and then reject and refuse to care about other and wider implications and accompanying truths, we might say. They belong mostly to the older generation. Well, older generation of what? Of spiritual development? Because you find many young people today that are, well, they're doing exactly this. But then, they are part of that old sixth ray regime. It's a great liability, and the sixth ray Lord is, we've been told, a beloved enigma to his fellow brother rays. And hope for them lies in their devotion and the fact that evolution itself will carry them forward into the second group. Devotion, let's see, is very useful. Whoops. Yeah. Okay. I think I have to go backward because, all right. Do I dare go back again? Right. Seem to be hung up here. Maybe there's a lesson in this for me. Maybe I've been one of those ones that emerged out of that fanatical group, and hopefully more into the second ray. We always have to question, what ray we've been on, because if it's ray 1, 2, or 3, there are no souls that come into incarnation on ray 1, 2, or 3. Maybe monads, but not souls. So devotion, how does it, see, devotion, dedication, glamour, and devotion. It's about the second initiation, and that last term is the way out. So let's just say here that devotion is a way through and out. I'm going to go over here to the rays and the initiations, and I'm going to turn to page 340, and we'll see here that dedication comes first, followed by glamour caused by the dedication, and the way of release finally is devotion. So indeed, there is the devotion of the soul. There's the Lord of ceaseless and persevering devotion, which is the monad. So devotion is not a bad thing at all. And it is a way of release. But when it is pure, loving, and blind to the intelligent factors, then it can be a temporary liability. So devotees have intolerance because of other methods, because they fear at the root that their own method is not the only method, and that they're hanging on for dear life to something which is merely one of a number of approaches. And that would involve complexity, and they're not up for the handling of complexity. The third ray type can, and if they switch on to the third ray, they can handle that, and then they become very, very rational as an antidote to their earlier devotion. All right, to this first group is committed the work of crystallization, which will result in a complete destruction of the old form. What do we say? That they emphasize it so much. The object of their devotion so much that they and it become crystallized. To them is given the task of defining the old truths so that the mind of the race will be clarified, that non-essentials and essentials will be recognized for what they are, and fundamental ideas so contrasted with the formulation of dogmas that that which is basic will be seen, and the secondary and unimportant beliefs therefore rejected, for only the basic and causative will be of value in the coming age. So they define what must be rejected to a large extent. There is value in the ancient methods, but it all depends on how you approach them. And if you approach them with a rigid, expulsive, intolerant, non-inclusive attitude, well, you're just not going to see the whole. And we are entering the age of universality, which implies that we must begin to see the whole. So the old form will be destroyed. That's the fact. And it has to be clarified as to what it is before real destruction results. The second group is as yet a very small minority. Now, this was 90 years ago. Maybe things have improved somewhat, but a steadily growing one. Instead of the sixth ray, I imagine it's more on the second ray, which is, after all, our planetary soul ray and our solar systemic soul and personality ray, and maybe ultimately monadic ray. It is that inner group of lovers of God, the intellectual mystics, the knowers of reality, who belong to no one religion or organization, but who regard themselves as members of the Church Universal and as members one of another. I'm looking at that wonderful friendship which exists between the Dalai Lama and Bishop Tutu. They both recognize each other as lovers of God beyond all dogma. And they are, probably even transcending the stage of intellectual mystic, Probably they are the true knowers of reality. So whatever the dogmatism is based upon one's culture, one's environment, one's history and so forth, there's something deeper than all of that, and it is the direct experience of God which transcends all those divisive words and separative Bibles and all the rest. They are gathered out of every nation, race, and people. They are of every color and school of thought, yet they speak the same language, learn by the same symbols, tread the same path, have rejected the same non-essentials, which are, clarified and brought into a crystallized form by the first group, have rejected the same non-essentials and have isolated the same body of essential beliefs, and we might almost say essential convictions. We have to recognize, excuse me, sorry, we have to recognize these people. They go beyond addiction to the dead letter, to dogma, which is accepted but largely not understood by those who accept. They recognize each other, I think, just the way the Dalai Lama and Bishop Tutu recognize each other. They accord equal devotion to the spiritual leaders of all races and use each other's Bibles with equal freedom. So this is the far more inclusive approach. They form the subjective background of the new world, because this is what's trying to emerge in the consciousness of humanity. They constitute the spiritual nucleus of the coming world religion. They are the unifying principle which will eventually save the world. So, the subjective background of the new world, the spiritual nucleus of the coming world religion, they cannot be trapped by their one particular holy book, not trapped by one Bible. That's so interesting, isn't it? They use each other's Bibles with equal freedom. I think that's an amazing statement. And we know that as we study with the Tibetan, we do that. We have the Christian Bible, we have the Bhagavad Gita, we have the Yoga Sutras, we probably have a fair amount of Zen and Taoism mixed in with all of this. We recognize the fundamental principles which are the foundation of every true Bible. In the past, we have had world saviors, sons of God, who have enunciated a world message and brought an increase of light to the people. Now, in the fullness of time and through the work of evolution, there is an emerging group who perhaps, there's still a question, will bring salvation to the world. Let's see. Okay, I think I've got to be very careful here, otherwise I end up copying more than I should. So let's just say the new group of world servers as a saving group, bring salvation to the world, and who embody the group ideas and demonstrating the group nature, manifesting in a small way the true significance of the body of Christ, which is a spiritual group, and giving to the world a picture of the true nature of a spiritual organism, will so stimulate and energize the thoughts and souls of men that the new age will be ushered in by an outpouring of love, knowledge, and harmony of God Himself. The new age will be ushered in by an outpouring of the love, knowledge, and harmony of God Himself. This is so important. So, let's make that big as usual. Okay, so this. Okay. So here, this is how the new age will be ushered in. Through this serving, saving group of intellectual mystics we call the new group of world servers, and they are receptive of the outpouring of the love, knowledge, and harmony of God Himself. They will energize the souls of men. Do you find yourself doing this? You find a way to energize the truer perception, the higher consciousness of human beings. Each of us should find a way, even if it's only a little way, to do this. Religions in the past have been founded by a great soul, by an avatar, by an outstanding spiritual personality. Obviously the spiritual principles through the personality, and the stamp of their lives and words and teaching has been set upon the race and has persisted for many centuries, and oftentimes long after the name of the teacher has disappeared from common knowledge. Long after the name of the teacher has disappeared from common knowledge. What will be the effect of the message of a group avatar? A kind of John the Baptist in group formation, or even something beyond the one who announces the coming. In a way, the whole hierarchy will be a group avatar, and their initiates appearing and lifting the race. What will be the potency of the work of a group of knowers of God, enunciating truth and banded together subjectively in the great work of saving the world? These are wonderful questions to ask, because a glorious future is suggested. He lets us answer these, but of course the implication is clear. What will be the potency of a group of knowers of God, enunciating the truth and banded together subjectively in the great work of saving the world? What will be the effect of the mission of a group of world saviors, not as Christ, but all knowers of God in some degree, who supplement each other's efforts, reinforce each other's message, and constitute an organism through which the spiritual energy and principle of spiritual life can make their presence felt in the world. Whoa. Well, obviously, a very good effect, and one that will help keep up with the time-space schedule of the planetary logos, which requires the exercise of the entire group idea, including group initiation and group approach to the elevation of human consciousness, not just the isolated teacher, the isolated spiritualized personality. I suppose some of those will appear too. Members of the hierarchy, heads of the ashram will appear, and they will be as if unique, and yet they too are the members of a great avataric group, serving avataric group. Anyway, this has been coming together, and even at that time, he says, such a body now exists with its members in every land. Relatively, they are few and far between, but steadily the numbers are increasing, and increasing their message will be felt. So, we are among those who have to consider ourselves as light bearers, carriers of the knowledge of divinity to people who are reaching out for it, may not even know it. And we do this together. And notice he said we supplement each other. We don't criticize each other. We reinforce each other's message. We strengthen each other. I think in the esoteric groups, there's still a lot of that which has to be achieved. Somehow we're not yet psycho-spiritually mature enough to really wholeheartedly reinforce each other, but it's got to be done, All right, so in them is rested a spirit of construction. Seventh ray is coming in, second ray is coming in different way. These are the two building rays. They are the builders of the new age. To them is given the work of preserving the spirit of truth. It's such a, I don't know, all the first three rays have this. Really, all the rays have the need to somehow preserve the truth, but they have different approaches to that truth, and some are closer than others, and some run the risk of distorting the truth more than others do. There's a clearness, a calmness, a serenity connected with the second ray, which helps to preserve the truth, the quality of the hidden vision. That's that method of inducing soul control. But remember, the wrong type of second ray individual can become a deluder of souls and a false teacher. So, but the truth, ray one, speaking truth because of absolute fearlessness, and ray two, that calm, intuitive, unruffled, undisturbed perception of the truth, and ray three, the acute energy of divine mental perception, reasoning carefully towards the truth, and ray four, the intuitive access, which is truth itself, and ray five, such an accuracy of investigation and such a discounting of the false that truth appears. And ray six, that idealistic reach after abstract truth, again, pure truth. A lot of what DK says about ray two can be attached to ray six individuals who are more highly developed. He says, but let me show you here. You probably remember it, but here is, I'm going to go to page 203 or something like that. And yeah, here it is. Well, hit that page. The student on this ray is ever unsatisfied with his highest attainments, no matter how great his knowledge, his mind, is still fixed on the unknown, the beyond, and on the heights as yet unscaled. Okay, well, maybe Ray 6 is a bit more violent in its approach, but it's really looking for some form of great ideal truth. As the Ray 7, the thought forms are very, very clear, and you see things in their clear interrelated outline, and maybe a lot of the glamours which fudge things over and mix them and confuse them are dispensed with in the Ray 7 approach to truth. All the rays have their method of truth. They are 7 rays of love. They are 7 rays of truth. They each have their own perspective. So in these people, hopefully we are members, of this and like these people, is given the work of preserving the truth and reorganizing the thoughts of men so that the racial mind of the entire human race is controlled and brought into that meditative and reflective condition which will permit it to recognize the next unfoldment of divinity. Now, the mind of humanity is disturbed by many things, emotions, conditions on the physical plane, and general adherence to inadequate mental formulations, the basis of illusion. All right, so we have a very progressive but smaller group here that is inclusive and really sees the fundamentals behind all the differences. There's been so much splintering in the various reactionary, backward-looking groups that, you can hardly tell one. Well, they have fragments, and they emphasize those fragments. And it's amazing how they hold on to 1 or 2 points which are really very secondary or tertiary and define their differences from with others on the basis of those points. I mean, can you imagine, some people, church groups allow you to be baptized in a symbolic way with water, let's say. Others, you have to hold your nose and go underwater, and that's it. Complete immersion, and they define their differences, and often it seems insuperable differences by petty points. There are so many of these, Do you believe in the Trinity? Are you a Unitarian? Do you not believe in the Trinity? I mean, these are mental formulations which separate, and the real energy, which is fundamental to all spiritual experience, is missing from those who are just holding on to the mental formulations. Connected with these 2 groups, the reactionary doctrinaires and the subjective band of mystics, that's our 2, and everywhere we see this, and we see this getting into politics as well, it's just a limitation of the consciousness, and you wonder, but it's so difficult sometimes to urge forward and to impel forward someone who's at a certain stage and is holding for dear life onto that stage as if it's the final solution. But in a world in which reality is absolute infinity, there is no final solution except the absolute itself, which we all are. Well, connected with these 2 groups, the reactionary doctrinaires and the subjective band of mystics, is the majority of the new generation of young people who are part of neither band and whose ideas are largely disorganized by the recognition of both. Which way shall the young people turn? Well, the young people, as he was talking about them then, are probably all dead now, or seeking reincarnation or something. And now there are other young people, and are they still characterized by this Are they mystics? Are they reactionaries? Maybe they're neither one. This majority do not belong to the past and refuse to accept the authority of the past. Well, that is very common today, still 90 years later. They do not belong to the inner group of knowers who are working at the task of swinging the thoughts of men into right channels, for they have not reached as yet the point of knowledge. Not yet are they there. I have a problem with this computer. There's plenty of room, but it doesn't want to save. Okay, I'm just hoping that the time of the saving, 1339, 1339, that's not too good. I'm going to try again. Let's see if I can do this. Save as. Will this work? Hopefully. Now I go back and I see, did it work? And apparently not. So I'm not really saving, and this is problematic. So let's try another one. I'm going to save number 13. I hope it's not bad luck. Here goes. Sorry for this little diversion, but if I don't solidify that which has been stated and said, then there's going to be a problem. Yeah, okay, well, that one allowed. Okay, so where do we stand? And obviously, we hope to be part of this subjective band of mystics. This majority do not belong to the past and refuse to accept the authority of that past. They do not belong to the inner group of knowers who are working at the task of swinging the thoughts of men into right channels, for they have not yet reached that point of knowledge, not yet. They only recognize two things: their need for freedom and an intense eagerness for knowledge. Maybe Master DK responded. Okay, maybe he responded to this, or the hierarchy did, and brought forth this great knowledge. Okay, now try again. I think I'm having a serious disk error that you are sharing with me. All right, not too good, not too good. Let's see if this will work at all. They despise the tradition of the past. They reject the old formulations of truth. And because as yet they stand on no sure ground, but are only in the position of seekers and inquirers, we have our present state of world of evil. They are not yet certain through experience. We have the present stage of world upheaval of apparent license, like you try anything, it's part of experimentation and disruption. People say they go too far, but they are experimenting and trying to discover. It should not be forgotten that this world state is therefore the result of the clashing of three types of forces prevalent in the world today. This is the cause that emanating from the holders of the old tradition who, emphasizing the forms and past, produce the destruction of those forms. And that's very interesting. If you overemphasize, you destroy. It's crystallization, right? And we've seen that. After the big war had not yet occurred. DK said, well, look, don't rebuild all the old buildings that are destroyed, trying to restore the old world. It's not really the way. Then there's that emanating from the inner group of mystics who, under the guidance of the planetary hierarchy, are building the new form. And I would say the new consciousness through that form. And then, number 3, that which is emanating from the masses who belong to neither group and who are wielding forces as yet blindly and often unwisely, until such time comes when they recognize those constructive channels into which it can be wisely poured. So, let's see what I have here. Okay. Yeah. We'll get rid of this. And we'll do that. So, 3 groups or 3 orientations are contributing to the present turbulence. And I don't think we can say that it's much different today, really. I think the young people are here, and there's a range there, of course, all the way from the intelligent masses to the rather unintelligent. He seems to link them all together. They're not yet. Some of them are close to being members of this inner group of mystics that we sometimes call the new group of world servers. Then there's the old reactionaries. Okay, well, friends, this would take us now to the second hour. And do I dare go in any further? I don't know. Maybe. So this is the end of hour 2 and number 31. I have my machines set up so perhaps this program can be preserved without, turning off and causing me a great deal of problems. So we're in a transition period, and that's what we'll begin with. He's being very practical here about the state of society at the present time, and basically we're dealing with the section called the present and the future. So for the time being, we'll sign off and then try to come back and complete a bit more. Okay, see you soon. Okay, friends, and now we go on, at least for a little while, maybe just a half hour. We've done 2 hours on this program. I know it's not best for the transcribers, but it does give me a certain streamlining as I go along, and time is of the essence. So we're dealing with the problems of the transitional era, and we're talking about 3 different kinds of groups: the reactionaries, holding on to the past, the new group of intellectual mystics thinking about the future universal world religion and the unification of humanity, and then I suppose the vast majority of people in the middle in all the different categories, some reaching towards the future, some closer to the past. Hence the problem, let's see, make sure I have this, hence the problem of this transition period, and hence the necessity for the giving out of teaching which will enable the seeking aspirant and inquirer to find himself. Well, I think DK here is justifying the hierarchy's approach at this time, offering a new teaching, a new way to be a disciple, a helper, a true friend of hierarchy who advances the cause of the elevation of the consciousness of humanity. Hence the need for the laws of the soul, the 7 laws of the soul, given in Esoteric Psychology 2, a book which came after this one. And for the truth as to individual unfoldment to be made clear to those who, rejecting the old tradition and refusing recognition to the mystic, yet seek to know themselves as liberated souls. Well, he did talk about intellectual mystics, and I think maybe a lot of us are that. Okay, the laws of the soul, well, I could name them, but you just go to Esoteric Psychology 2 and make sure you know what each one of them offers. Hence the need for the laws of the soul and for the truth as to individual unfoldment to be made clear to those who, rejecting the old tradition and refusing recognition to the mystic. That's an interesting phrase. At least we do not follow the strictly mystical approach, do we? Yet seek to know themselves as liberated souls, true knowers, right? Right? And with that knowledge will come the steady growth of the building mystics. And this, I suppose, is, the new group of world servers, the building mystics. For when a man has found his soul and recognizes its relationship to its mechanism of expression, the threefold lower man, he automatically passes into the consciousness of the subjective life and begins to work with cause and is no longer lost in the world of effect. So this is an interesting phrase, this phrase concerning the building mystics, and maybe one with which we wish to align. Have we found our soul? Do we recognize its relationship? Well, have we found ourselves? If we find our soul, we find ourselves and distance ourselves from the not self with which we so persistently identified for so many millions of years. For when a man has found his soul and recognizes its relationship to its mechanism of expression, the threefold lower man, he automatically passes into the consciousness of the subjective life. And this is not just the subtle life, because the subtle bodies are astral and mental. But we are speaking of something more, of something still more interior. All right, and he begins to work in the world of causes, and eventually, he finds himself within the causal body, which, as far as his personality is concerned, is the origin of the appearance of that causal body. Then he finds himself standing shoulder to shoulder with the mystics and knowers of all time, shoulder to shoulder. It's a great image of how to work together, and he uses it a few times. This is the trend of the religious impulse at this time, and this is the glory of the coming age. No, not just the selfish mystical approach, not just the reactionary, frightened, terrified approach, not the consciousness of the masses either, but something new, a truly spiritual occultism, which will ally the individual with the greater mystics, I would say, and knowers. Because, some of those we call mystics are really the knowers. Like, for instance, Meister Eckhart. Yes, and there were others who had the intellectual capacity. He talks about the intellectual mystics and those who have a more occult orientation, I think, in the reappearance of the Christ. I found myself, at a, age of maybe 19, 20, 21, right in there, just ravenously reading the mystical literature. I guess I was defining the past. What did I get out of it? I don't know. I did end up reading one of those books that Master Moria recommended long before I knew that Master Moria recommended it. And it was The Imitation of Christ. A very challenging book. As Moria tells us, it's not the worship of Christ that we must be interested in, but the daring which makes it possible for us to imitate what he has done. And that's essentially follow me, If it is true that there is being gathered together in the background of our present world state a group of mystics who are distinguished by knowledge, vision, and power to work on mental levels, unseen and unrecognized by men, it could also be noted that this band is not confined to the strictly religious types. Okay. And that's important because spirituality is far more than the church or religious approach, and he even tells us that it's one of the great victories of the Black Lodge that spirituality, in the minds of so many, is confined to the strictly religious approach. It's just not true. We have to widen our understanding of spirituality. So anyway, they have this knowledge, vision, power to work on mental levels, behind the scenes. Men and women in every branch of human thought are found among this group, including scientists and philosophers. Every branch of knowledge. Every branch. Okay. And this is a new approach to spirituality. We began to think that only the ministers have the capacity to be truly, deeply spiritual. Great mistake. Like all else said, I mean, it's very interesting to hear Buckminster Fuller and Albert Einstein, examples of powerful third ray, fifth ray, seventh ray, if you combine the two of them, speak about their conception of God. Einstein is always mentioning God, and Fuller has some definitions of God which are extraordinary and obviously shows that the reverse of the old statement is also true, that man makes God in his own image, and the more primitive the psyche, the more primitive the conception of God, and vice versa. Like all else at this time, science itself is in the process of transformation, as little as it is realized by many. And little as it is realized by many, their work with what they call matter and their investigations of the atom are entering into a new field. And what can we call it? Perhaps the etheric field. And, look at the progress that's been made now. Tremendous progress over the last 80, 90 years. We really are penetrating into the ethers, photographing the fields of the ethers, or at least finding machines that can indicate this. It'll be very interesting to see what science does, having done away with the need for the ethers, maybe in the Michelson-Morley experiment. Was it in the 1880s or something like that? How will the ethers be reinstated? What will they be called? How will they be represented to man? Maybe the old version of the ethers will fail and something new will be substituted. But there is a destined meeting here of science and occultism with regard to what the occultist calls the etheric body. So anyway, all of these experiments in science are entering a new field. In this field, the older techniques and mechanisms will gradually be discarded and a new approach and a different fundamental concept as to the nature of matter will mark the new age. So reconceptualizing of what is matter, what are the waters of space, what is the substance of the dense physical plane. There is a dense physical plane. There's also something subtler and subtler and subtler. Within the next 25 years, so I imagine that's almost up to 1950 or a little beyond, emerging out of the two seemingly different ideas as to the nature of the atom, one more as energy perhaps, a recognition of certain energy impulses will be seen, and this will be based on the discovery of those energies which, playing on the atom and on atomic forms, produces the tangible concrete shapes to which we give the names of various kingdoms of nature. So the substantial causality of the ethers will be detected, even maybe not named. But the interconnection of matter and energy, was proven with the atomic bomb. And DK did write about that in a way that few people understand, but basically he said, okay, this has shattered materialism. So he's thinking in the long term. He's not just thinking of form. He's thinking about the rescue of human consciousness from the materialistic point of view. So, the truth of certain basic premises of the ageless wisdom will be demonstrated. Here he is prophesying. So let's see what he says. Such as, 1. The soul is the form-building principle producing attraction and cohesion. I suppose the proof of the soul is not yet substantiated, but the direction of human thought is correct in this regard. Okay, in this regard. I should have that one. Okay, in this respect, in this regard. The soul is an aspect or type of energy distinguished from that of matter itself. And, what about the subtle vehicles? They, too, are distinguished from what humanity today normally calls matter. The atom has been recognized as an energy unit, but as yet the energy which sweeps atoms into aggregates, which we call organisms and forms, has not been isolated. These are material or etheric rather patterns called now morphogenic or genetic fields. Rupert Sheldrake's work, morpho, the form, genic or genetic, the birth of forms, the fields which birth forms. This the mystics in the scientific world will sense and work to demonstrate during the next generation. What is a generation? It's being demonstrated now. It began to emerge maybe in the 60s and 70s. It is this type of energy, the energy of form building aspect of manifestation, which is the source of all magical work. We might say, deeply related to the seventh ray. And it is this energy in the various kingdoms of nature that produce form, shape, species, kind, type, and the differentiations which mark and distinguish the myriad forms through which life manifests. So let's just say we will investigate the myriad forms caused by many types of etheric patterns. I imagine it's a very geometrical world, this world of the ethers. We're told that God geometrizes, and here we have, well, it's sort of the soul of matter in a way, in a way. Ether is the soul of matter. It is the quality of the energy which produces the quantity of forms. It is the light which causes the emergence into consciousness of the race of heterogeneous shapes which aggregates of atoms can assume. Emergence into consciousness of the race. It is the light. Well, in a way, this is the true astral light, and not the astral light of the emotional body. So great diversity of substantial causative energies exist, causing the great diversity which we tangibly, of which we notice the tangibility out here in the world of concrete forms. So it's the ether that's being discovered, and the soul is behind that. There's a connection, we might say, between the soul, the etheric body, and the forms which are generated on the physical plane, and the mind enters into this as well. Maybe the astral body is somewhat left out, but really none of them is left out in the magical process, ultimately. This is interesting, a number of points here, premises of the ageless wisdom. The soul, we're not there yet in terms of demonstrating what the real soul is on the higher mental plane. Not by a long way are we there yet, but there is a soul energy and a subtle energy distinguished from matter. Of course, the subtle vehicles are composed of a more refined matter, so maybe the soul consciousness is distinguished even from that type of matter. Well, actually it is, but we have not yet registered those more subtle types of matter. So the energy unit of the atom is compelled still by more subtle energies. Okay, this is by means of the impulsion, compulsion from more subtle formative energies. I mean, in medicine, this is really now appearing, we're realizing that these externalized diseases are the result of etheric conditions which are prompted perhaps largely by emotional causes, not so much yet, we're told, mental causes. All right. So etheric energy, we're studying a book on white magic and related to the seventh ray, and it's fitting that we discuss these matters here. This type of energy, which produces the shapes and forms and coherent organisms in all the kingdoms of nature, is not the life principle. It itself is animated. So we always look for life, and sometimes we think that life is the cell or life is the atom, but there's more to it. Life is so deeply recessed. Life is being. Life is God. Life is the purest principle. The absolute ultimately is life. The life principle will remain undiscovered and unrecognized until such time as the soul or qualifying principle, creating all the differences because of different modes of qualification, or, well, there's different ways to use that word, but different ways of adding quality to matter, or adding quality to the forms which matter is impelled to take. So this life principle, deeply recessed, will remain undiscovered until such a time as the soul or qualifying principle, the builder of the forms, through the etheric body, I suppose, but ultimately of the entire personality form, is studied, recognized, and in its turn investigated. So we might say, first, the investigation of the etheric body, and then the investigation of the soul on the higher mental plane, and will it be given to France with its fifth ray soul to make the scientific discovery of the true nature of the soul, or that vehicle for consciousness on the higher mental plane? So life, it's always making me do that, Let's just say that we have a problem here. I hope life is a factor deeply recessed and presently inaccessible in its true nature. Yeah, but it will not be so perpetually. There will be a way to find out what life is, and that we ourselves are life. And Blavatsky's profound statements about spirit, soul, and matter, and life pervading them all has to be understood not only philosophically, but scientifically. Now, when will this happen? The life principle remaining undiscovered until the soul is recognized. Let's just say soul must first be recognized before what we call life can be understood. So this is only possible as man steps forth into a fuller conscious possession of his divine heritage and working as a soul and in control of his mechanism. Physical, emotional, mental can work consciously en rapport with the soul in all forms, and let's just say, and not be deluded by the form alone. Now, you read some things about the fifth ray and the garment of God, and the need to seek the one behind that garment. There is a need. This will be possible only as the race grasps the above hypothesis and recognizes it as a possibility and seeks to demonstrate the fact of the soul factor, we might say the etheric factor, first etheric, then soul, lying back of its structure or body of manifestation, the personality, or equally seeks to disprove it. So let's just say, let the idea first be interesting and investigation follow. Yeah, soul is deeply connected with the etheric body, but then it's connected with every body, mental, emotional, etheric. So the soul hypothesis has first to be accepted, or at least the idea of substantiality underlying the external dense body. So basically, we're talking here about the discovery of the etheric body, and strides have been made amongst progressive scientists to indicate the existence of this formative field, this morphogenic field. I'm not even up on all the research here, but I know that people with a strong 7th ray and 5th ray are carrying it forward. All great scientists and workers in the realm of objective nature have worked as souls, like the Curies, for instance, bringing through the 7th ray. And all the most amazing of the developments in the realms of physics and chemistry, as in other departments of human knowledge, have been made when the worker in any particular field has launched forth with faith in some hypothesis he has formed and has investigated and progressed his work forward stage by stage until he has contacted an aspect of the truth hitherto formulated. So the soul, the intuition lie behind discoveries by the great scientists. When it comes to Einstein's theories, people acknowledge the truth of the great majority of them, but they wonder how in the world he ever came up with it. Well, he was a Pisces with Cancer rising, very strong Neptune, and also a very strong concrete ability with Saturn, Mercury, and Aries conjunction. And he rode the imagination until it opened the door to certain intuitions. He was a great intuitive, but also a exacting thinker, though not, as he says, a great mathematician. He always had to have his mathematics checked by someone who was more rigorous in that respect. Anyway, then, having through the use of his intuition entered into a new realm of thought, he takes the knowledge there discovered and formulates it in such a way by theory, principle, and experiment and mechanical contrivance that it becomes the possession of the group, and in due time is understood and utilized by the world. Was it with Einstein's theory about the bending of light, relating light and gravitation, and it was a 1919 experiment by, was it Eddington, more fifth ray type even, who went out to observe whether this bending of light, whether light was subject to gravitation and so forth, actually did occur, and the weather was suitable for the observation. And then in a fifth ray manner, Einstein's theory of relativity, or the special theory and then a more general theory, but one of those theories was confirmed due to the fifth ray, well, we might say mechanical contrivance, experiment and mechanical contrivance, observation. Einstein simply thought it up. And thus it is with great mathematicians and maybe the most advanced of scientists. They need the more concrete confirmational approach to back them up, and others often provide that. But in its genesis, it has been mystical work and based on mystical intuition. So let's just say that Master DK here, Master DK is not separating science and mysticism. They are, for him, of a piece. So this is all about penetration into the unknown by the venturing intuitive scientists, and then the confirmation through more concrete forms of proof. I think Einstein was asked what would have happened had it been overcast, had Eddington, I think it was Eddington, I hope so, not been able to confirm. What then? What would you have done? He says, well, it wouldn't have made any difference. I know it's true. Something of that nature. But it was a good thing that it was confirmed. I mean, the German scientists of the period, when he was putting forth these theories, thought it was absolute nonsense. Because, it was a very concrete Teutonic fifth ray mind that was at work, and it couldn't grasp the more intuitive, nuanced thought coming from Neptune. But okay, we do penetrate, and the new types of knowledge, transcendental knowledge, does enter and then is brought down into utility, greater usefulness by those who are equipped to do so. All right. So, where are we? It might be noted here that 3 great discoveries are imminent, and during the next 2 generations will revolutionize modern thought. Again, when he uses the word generations, is he speaking of some spiritual factor, or, does he mean the normal 20, 25 years? I remember there was a man who wrote a book called Prophecy on Trial, and he noticed how many of DK's prophecies had either not worked out or not worked out as he said. But it was a bit of a cantankerous book, I think, and the man was highly critical and didn't live long, after writing that book. I don't know why, but he put some of this to the test. But in time, it all works out, because the time factor is fluid, and so much depends upon how humanity will respond. There is free will, and there's not an absolute fixity as far with regard to the time element. All right, so 3 great discoveries are imminent, and we're imminent at that time. I suppose we can put things on trial ourselves and see if they did work out. One is already sensed and is the subject of experiment and investigation, the releasing of the energy of the atom, and this in some important but not final respect has happened. Well, that's perhaps why DK was so, almost exuberant about the release of the atom, even though it occurred in such a destructive way. Well, he knew that also that Japan at the time had to, being very much involved in the physical etheric form, had to have its Maya broken. And the Maya was largely broken by that atomic explosion, and perhaps something much worse was avoided. It was still in danger, and the Black Lodge is strong and persistent, proud and determined. So we just have to, sometimes you say, how can people be so bad, And DK says, well, they're worse than anything you can imagine. As a matter of fact, you can't imagine. Worse than anything you can imagine. But it shows the danger when pride takes over and one begins to become an entity only to oneself, almost in defiance of the possibility of right relationship or a relationship based on love. The second factor of divinity just isn't part of their present life demonstration. Of course, all is redeemed, and the essence of all entities is identical. So anyway, one has already sensed the releasing of the energy of the atom. Well, a whole story lay ahead there of experiments in New Mexico, Los Alamos. I've been there a few times. And Alamogordo, the bomb, and so forth. Interesting that New Mexico should be chosen at that time. Of course, it was completely different then, and it seemed very remote. This will completely change the economic and political situation in the world, for the latter is largely dependent on the former. Politics is based on economics. This is what he's saying. Politics is based on economics. Our mechanical civilization will be simplified. I mean, we're not there yet, obviously. This release of the energy of the atom has not had a full chance to do what it might, and even the fifth ray ashram had to be somewhat curtailed, I think, between the years 1950 and 2000, so things didn't get out of hand, and knowledge did not race so far ahead of the moral development of man that disaster would be waiting. Our mechanical civilization will be simplified and an era ushered in which will be free from the incubus of money, its possession and its non-possession, and the human family will recognize universally its status as a bridging kingdom between the three lower kingdoms of nature and the fifth or spiritual kingdom. Release from money. I think that many who hold the power of money now are very frightened by that prospect because, they can think ahead and they can see what would happen with the release to all of abundant energy. There will be time and freedom for a soul culture which will supersede our modern methods of education, and the significance of soul powers and the development of the superhuman consciousness will engross the attention of educators and students everywhere. Excuse me. Well, this has not yet happened, and 90 years has passed here, or at least 85, but the indications are in that direction, and the promise is great, and the education new soul culture and our modern methods of training the mind by almost by dogmatic approaches will end. Soul powers, the heritage of all who have developed sufficiently, will be released, and for the upper echelons in humanity, the development, and eventually for everybody, the development of superhuman consciousness will be acknowledged and promoted. Okay, sounds good, doesn't it? 3 great discoveries. So this release of the energy of the atom, and not yet through fusion has this been done, but it is anticipated, even though selfishly held back by those who benefit by preserving the present, soon-to-be antiquated methods. It's a terrible thing to hold humanity back because you realize your own selfish advantage is promoted by holding humanity back. Okay, a second discovery. 3 great discoveries. So the first is all about the atom. And now another here will grow out of the present investigations into light and color. It's already happening. And it's one of the first methods of healing under the 4th ray that will be developed, he tells us, in esoteric healing. The effect of color on people, animals, and units in the vegetable kingdom will be studied, and the result of those studies will be the development of etheric vision, or the power to see the next grade of matter with the strictly physical eye, because it is an adaptation of the eye which allows for etheric vision. It's not a psychic gift per se. It's kind of a physiological, anatomical gift for the sensitized eye. Increasingly will people think and talk in terms of light And the effect of the coming developments in this department of human thought will be triple. And we can say that already this is occurring. People will possess etheric vision. And some do now, and some acknowledge it now. B, the vital or etheric body lying as the inner structure of the outer forms, the substanding energy, we might say, will be seen and noted and studied in all the kingdoms of nature. And hence the factor of health based upon the etheric body will be, I suppose, eventually meticulously understood. This will break down the barriers of race and all distinctions of color, and the essential brotherhood of man will be established. Because right now, when we want to say who is the man, we look at the outer form and the color of that form and its place of origin and so forth. And eventually we will see that the truer man is the interior man, and there's a certain commonality there. There's no races per se. Maybe there are, I don't know, some etheric differences, but we're born in different races constantly and in different locales. So this thing we all share internally, the causal body, the egoic lotus, and the condition of the etheric body will be established. We shall see each other in all forms of divine manifestation as light units of varying degrees of brightness, and shall talk and think increasingly in terms of electricity, of voltage, of intensity, and of power. Well, Aquarius is a fifth ray sign. The seventh ray may accompany it and rule one of its major planets, Uranus, on some level. But, in fact, a fifth ray does work its way through Aquarius, and this is all fifth ray language. The ray of electricity will speak in terms of voltage, intensity, maybe flow, amps, ohms, resistance, all that kind of thing. Yeah, we will have a new light language, a language to describe people as light units. The age and status of men in regard to the ladder of evolution will be noted and become objectively apparent. No more fooling, right? Can't pretend to be what you are not, because it will all be seen. The inner light will be seen, and the readiness for initiation, we're told, will be seen. The relative capacities of old souls and young souls will be recognized, thereby reestablishing on earth the rule of the enlightened, and not basing election decisions on superficialities. We are so far from this now, but maybe quickly the walls of ignorance can fall. I think so. What a world it will be. And, that's why this last-ditch fight of materialism is occurring, to try to hold that off, because it is a democratization of power and capacity. And people, the initiates of old, who are the negative types, like to hold on to their particular powers and prerogatives to satisfy their warped desires. And there was a huge warping of desire in Atlantean days. And some of these people are still examples of this. As DK says, brothers of unique blindness. How they got to be that way? Well, one day, some object lesson will be shown. We'll understand what the decisions were which led to such a terrible fate and such a terrible interference with the progress of humanity. It will all be known, and it will be a cautionary tale, and help other people avoid those particular pitfalls. So we're going to see, and we're going to have a much clearer view of why we are putting certain people in power and not others. There are some people in power that just don't belong there at all today. They have been voted in for very selfish and superficial reasons, And when the absence of the inner light relatively is noticed, they wouldn't stand a chance to be put into positions of authority. Note here that these developments will be the work of the scientists of the next 2 generations. I have to say, again, what is a generation? That is a question, because sometimes, just like a cycle, a period, a world period, whatever, they can mean diverse things. So I suppose maybe there are spiritual generations and there are strictly physical generations. What does he mean? Or have things really been retarded because of humanity's choices and because of the greater than anticipated power of the Black Lodge? Note here that these developments will be the work of the scientists of the next 2 generations, and the result of their efforts, that would be like 50 years if you give 25 to a normal generation. This being written in, I don't know, early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, and it would take us to, the year 1975, and immediately beyond that would be a Shambhala impact. I'm sure much was planned as possible, which did not entirely work out as foreseen. There's the ideal outcome in terms of quality and time, and then there's what happens. Their work, the work of these scientists with the atom of substance, and their investigations in the realm of electricity, of light and power, must inevitably demonstrate the relation between forms, which is another term for brotherhood, and the fact of the soul, the inner light and radiance of all forms. So here are definitions. Okay, a good definition of brotherhood and the fact of the soul. So, brotherhood, and we talk about this, the relation between forms, and the fact of the soul, let's just say the inner radiance of all forms. Well, we're not there yet. We're not subtle enough yet. We're just learning. And one day we'll be in a position to see all of those choices and events which either promoted or retarded learning. Eventually, a person has to sacrifice himself in order to facilitate the more rapid and sure upliftment of humanity. There's no way around it, and we have to learn the power of sacrifice. I'm sure it's not the most pleasant thing if we're identified with the personality or as the personality, but it is something that every potential member of the Great White Lodge has experienced, or every member has experienced, and every potential member must come to terms with. Now, the third development, and that's going to be maybe the last one we can take care of in this particular rather lengthy program, lengthy in order to save time. The third development, which will be the last probably to take place, will be more strictly in the realm of what the occultist calls magic. Okay, well, maybe they would call it something else in different disciplines. It will grow out of the study of sound and the effect of sound, that will put into man's hands a tremendous instrument in the world of creation. It kind of reminds you of those cyclopean structures, which modern man would have a hard time building, but which giants in possession of the powers, secrets of the powers of sound, could indeed build. It's in South America somewhere. I don't know if it's Ecuador. I can't remember exactly, but there are huge stones so tightly placed that there's no possibility of any penetration of the joins. How were they lifted? How were they placed? Mysteries which will be made more clear once these occult powers are again in the possession of a rather redeemed human race. Through the use of sound, the scientist of the future will bring about his results. Through sound, a new field of discovery will open up. The sound which every form in all kingdoms of nature gives forth will be studied and known, and changes will be brought about, and new forms developed through its medium. Developing new forms through the manipulation of sound. One hint only may I give here, and that is that the release of energy in the atom is linked to this new coming science of sound. Well, one has to remain just a little silent before that, but eventually I think there will be atomic control through the power of sound. So all these things the scientists will be able to do in the future. The brilliant scientist, the intuitive scientist, reaching into the occult lore and finding in his ashram the secrets that are necessary in order to bring sound through. So first discovery, second discovery, and so forth. Let's see, do we have that? It's always this, what is the first discovery? Oh my. So the premises will be, three great, it's over here. Three great discoveries. One, the energy of the atom. Okay. Two is sound and color, and then, well, color particularly, and then three is sound. Okay. So, what are the three? Energy of the atom, effect of color, and the effect of sound. So let's just make note of those three great discoveries. Energy of the atom, color, and sound. And of course, I think it's coming up pretty soon, because he said that the very first occult healing method would be the fourth, I think, and related to the fourth ray, and have much to do with color and sound. A little more. The significance of what has happened in the world during the last century in the realm of sound is not appreciated nor yet understood. It's a noisy world, isn't it? Terrific events are, however, being produced by the unbelievably increased noise and sound emanating from the planet at this time. Unbelievable. Okay. The roar of machines, the rumble of the transportation mechanisms in all parts of the world, trains, vessels, airplanes. The focusing of the sounds of men in such congested areas as the great cities, and at this time the universal use of the radio, okay, at this time, and now much more, bringing musical sounds into every home and into street life, are producing effects upon the bodies of men and upon all forms of life everywhere, which will be apparent only as time elapses. Now, we live within it and we don't recognize it, but the masters, being very sensitive, have to be, we are told, quite careful about how much they expose themselves to the prevailing chaotic cacophony. Some forms of life in the animal kingdom, but primarily in the vegetable kingdom, will disappear. He told us blue flowers disappearing, violet flowers coming in, for instance. And the response of the human mechanism to this world of sound, uproar, and music, in which it will increasingly find itself, will be most interesting. But this is not yet detected in any large way. Just something we put up with. Sometimes you go into New York City, you can't, the horns are honking and the wheels are turning, the traffic is constant. The sound of squealing brakes, the sirens are there. It's a noisy place, and it's having its effect. And, other great cities will be like that as well. But just think how we broadcast music now, and speeches and events in various places. We get the exact replica of what's happening. Something that could not even be done at that time. The broadcasting methodologies were not true to the actual event. Anyway, these are the three events. Control of the energy of the atom, the use of color, and the use of sound. These three developments will usher in wow, it's just such an unhappy condition my computer is in. Just doesn't want me to save. These three developments will usher in the new age, will produce in this transition period the needed changes, and will inaugurate a new era wherein brotherhood will be the keynote, for it will be a demonstrated fact in nature. So think of it, the atom, color, and sound inaugurating the new age. The energy of the atom, color, and sound inaugurating the new age. Yeah. Brotherhood will, according to one reference, be prevalent by the time we reach the Mercury decade of Capricorn, of Aquarius, and according to another, the era of brotherhood will be the Venus period. The Venus period. Okay. It will be an age wherein men will walk in the light, for it will be a world of recognized inner radiance. Well, it's just wonderful things. So I'm going to stop here. This will be the prediction of the nature of the new age. He's been doing that. We're in a section called The Present and the Future. We've gone up to page 336. And if I were we're here. Right. So up to 336, and this is the end of number 31, and 32 will be beginning. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. I think we're there. All right, predictions of the future. And that's where I'll stop. That's enough. More than enough, maybe. This is the end of number 31. And we've gone from 322 to 336. And the day is the 23rd of August. And we're on to number 32, important number in Masonry. And this is the end of number 16, and this is the end of number 15. And we'll go from 336. So, friends, I hope that this recording does work out okay and that it's not overwhelming. I offer you my musings on what DK has said. I offer you some connections which come to my mind. I offer you the attempt to synthesize. I don't know, how long have I been in these books? Maybe almost 50 years, maybe not quite. More like 48 years specifically in these books. And the interconnection of the various things that the Master has said that maybe will open up new areas of light for us. That's the offering. And I hope they serve you. And make for a more inclusive mind, and a mind which sees the synthesis of things increasingly. That's what I'm hoping. Okay, friends, we'll talk to you later. Lots of love. Study hard. Many blessings. Study hard.